I don't think any company wants employees who don't want to be there. Or who would have countless number of spaces dedicated, built for that specific purpose, and that purpose no longer exists. Well, let's just create an office so that when they do come in, they're productive. Forcing them into the office 5 days a week into a space that they don't want to be in. It's like, do you really think you're going to get a more productive workforce that way?
Hello, workplace innovators of the world. Welcome back to Workplace Visionaries, the podcast that gets real about the present and future of how people work. My name's Jane Young from Hubstar, and this episode is a conversation with Brian Huber. And Brian certainly earned his stripes as a workplace innovator, shaping occupancy strategies for companies like Salesforce and Pinterest. So in this episode, we get into why the future of workplace planning is about predicting demand, not counting desks, how Pinterest is redesigning their offices around collaboration instead of attendance, what workplace leaders can learn from Salesforce's hypergrowth years about planning for uncertainty, why data matters, but only if you know which questions to ask, and a whole lot more. For all you practitioners out there who are trying to create workplaces that are better for employees and better for the business, this one is for you. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Brian Huber, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while, actually, because I think there's something really interesting about the trajectory of your work life and your approach that has an entrepreneurial and innovative thread running through it, in the sense that you've both shaped new roles that didn't necessarily exist in organizations before you showed up, and you've shaped new approaches and new models that also didn't exist before you showed up.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I think it was just kind of part of always looking to try something new, and which can be tricky at a corporate setting. But if you can kind of figure out little things here and there that interest you at the same time as identifying needs within a company, you kind of start to carve out paths that maybe aren't like the traditional path. And being in a corporate real estate world, there isn't as much as like a set model for a lot of these roles where it's like you go from this level to this level to this level. It's for a lot of things, there's not like just this set ladder that you're following up the corporate chain, especially for the kind of that occupancy planning, space planning, workplace area where it does morph and change. And so you kind of have to figure out where it is you want to go with your career and what you are interested in doing.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. It's kind of a relief in some ways, because we've gone from this world where there is the straight line path and the clear ladder. So the fact that you don't have to get hung up on that, and you can create your own path is something reassuring about that.
Yeah. Reassuring and terrifying, because it's also like, well, what do I do next? Because there isn't the like, okay, I know I have to check off these boxes, then I can move on to this. It's kind of like, well, what's up? What's down the line? I have to figure it out as I go along.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I thought it'd be interesting to start by going back a bit to when you're a teenager, maybe, or when you're at that point where you're deciding what to do, because I know you ended up studying anthropology at UCLA. So I'm interested to go back to that time a little bit, just to understand, what do you think really piqued your interest in that people, culture, behavior thing? Because that's tightly related in many ways to what you ended up doing.
It is, and it was by no means any sort of planned.
Never is.
There was no strategy there. I'll say that. So I went to school, and at UCLA, the way it works is when I originally went, I went in undeclared. So I didn't even have a major picked, which you can do at UCLA. And kind of originally, my plan was to go into communications. And at UCLA, it's a closed major. So essentially, you apply while you're there, and then you start your junior year. So it's only like a 2-year program. Mm-hmm. So you kind of, for the first 2 years, you're just taking your prereqs, you're taking a bunch of different classes. And that's all based on like, do you have the GPA? Will they let you in, kind of thing. So those first 2 years, I was just doing all my kind of general ed stuff and took a couple of anthropology classes just because they sounded interesting and I needed credits. And it was just kind of, you're taking all these kind of, it's kind of the beauty of being undeclared, where it was kind of, I was taking classes across the board because I didn't have to stick to one subject at that time. And so after taking a couple of anthropology classes, I realized they were by far my favorite classes. I did really well in them. It was something that just kind of came naturally to me. And then I had also been talking to people in the communications, and some people, they would get into the program and I kind of were miserable. I didn't like it. And so I was kind of sitting there thinking like, well, do I go for this where, maybe I won't enjoy it? I don't really know where I want to head. I don't have a set plan. Like if I could become get a degree in communications, what is it I want to do with it? And I didn't have that. So I was just like, these are my favorite classes. This is really interesting. It's a pretty broad major. And at UCLA, you could do a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science in anthropology. And essentially what that meant was people generally, if you did the Bachelor of Arts, most people are going to law school. If you did the Bachelor of Science, those people are going to med school. So you kind of were picking the two tracks. So At that point, I was thinking, I think the law could be something interesting. So I did the Bachelor of Arts with the intention to go to law school. And then when it came time to take the LSAT, which is like the entrance exam to get into law school, we're talking to people. And once again, some people were like, oh, I love being an attorney. Other people were like, oh, I hate being an attorney. And so I decided to kind of, in a weird way, take a gap year. And that I decided I wasn't going to go straight into law school. I was going to take a year and actually work at a law firm to see if it's something I wanted to do. I'm so glad I did, because I quickly discovered like, no, I don't want to be an attorney. I saved myself a few $100,000 in law school.
Yeah.
But then it was like, so then now I'm working at a law firm. It's like, well, what do I want to do next? Because this isn't what I necessarily want to do. So it was really just kind of finding a path and really just kind of following what interested me.
Yeah, and I noticed that you've also stuck around in roles for relatively long periods of time rather than job hopping, which has become more of the norm, which I think might have something to do with you developing this entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial streak, in the sense that when you deeply understand an organization, you have this well-developed mental model of it, how it works and what works well and what doesn't and what needs fixing. And I think that means you can actually have some really well-informed ideas about how to do things differently and better. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, it is very true. I am not a job hopper. So I guess I'm not reactionary. And I think part of that is what helps me in the role I do is that I don't hear something or someone say something and instantly like, oh, we better change everything. We got it because things are changing. It's always that, well, let's wait and see what's happening and then kind of model to that and slow adaptation instead of drastic response. And so, I was at that law firm for a few years before I decided to move to the next thing. And then at Salesforce for 12 years. For that, I jumped to really try the entrepreneurial thing and start my own business, which was terrible timing. And now I'm with my current company at Pinterest for almost 5 years now. And it does. I think you get, and like with those companies, I wasn't in the same role the whole time. You start, so you are moving around. You're just doing it within the same company. Yeah. So you're still learning and getting exposure, but you're also, like you mentioned, getting really deep knowledge of how an organization is working. And so with that, you can really start to kind of understand ways in which you can find improvements or target things where you think like, oh, I actually think we can do this better. And you're not coming from an outside. It's an interesting, a lot of times you want to bring in the outsider perspective to be like, oh, we're doing it this way. So bring in someone else who has a completely different thought process and they'll shake things up.
Yeah.
Or on the other hand, if you can be there for so long to understand it so well, and if you still have that mindset of how do we change things, well, now you have the background and the knowledge within that organization to help actually make those changes stick and respond to what the company really needs and not just kind of what's the new thing out there.
I really like that, because so often we're buffeted by the winds of change. There'll be clickbait headlines and, oh, change strategy, or something just happened, and something anecdotal. And I think when that happens and it's all a bit knee jerk, it in some ways speaks to a lack of strategy and a lack of a long view. Because when you have a strategy, essentially, I guess, deciding half of it's just deciding what not to do and what not to be buffeted by, isn't it? You're sort of trying to carve a path somewhere, and that wait and see it, and let's see how this pans out and not rushing is kind of I think we could do with more of that in the world right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And and specifically from a corporate real estate perspective, it is not a fast moving feast, because I was just the pure nature of it, leasing, building out space. It's like we're on years timelines. This isn't something you can switch in a week. So you have to kind of have that mindset of, we can't shift on a dime every time, because by the time, if you changed every time there was a change in business direction, you would never be able to deliver anything.
Yeah.
Because they'd be like, okay, we're going to do this now. Okay, well, give me another 12 months. It's like, okay. Oh, and then 6 months into it, they're like, actually, new leader, he wants to do this. It's like, okay, well, the next person comes in and she wants to do that. Well, now it's like, we're never going to be able to deliver on it. So you kind of have to slowly work your way to these changes and kind of understand how things actually play out in the long run.
Yeah.
And how do you be flexible and build out spaces or behaviors that are flexible inherently, so they can make those shifts without having to do radical changes.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you were at Salesforce around the 2010-ish era, which was just this huge explosive period of growth. But I mean, that must have been quite a ride in terms of how your role and your broader function had to develop and adapt. There's quite a few aspects to that, I guess, getting into the design and programming for offices, the M&A side of things, how you integrate, and you had, I think I've heard you, when we have chatted before, mention a 3-year puzzle, which speaks to your long view. So yeah, what new approaches did you realize that you had to come up with to make all that happen and to sort of weather that storm of massive growth?
Yeah, it was kind of a fascinating time, because it was a sizable company, but it was still going through explosive growth. So it was this weird thing where you're still kind of operating as a startup in many ways, where like we would have hundreds of temporary desks on standby because we couldn't get space fast enough for the number of people we were hiring. So it was like, where can you throw up a desk in a corner of a floor and like, how do you just keep adding and adding? At the same time, you are trying to build out space and grow and expand. But then it becomes the massive puzzle. And I was working on the headquarters, so San Francisco, mostly for, and it was growing. I mean, you're getting a 1 million square feet and starting from 8 floors. And by the end, you're at 75 floors or so. It's just these drastic numbers. And so I kind of created the occupancy planning role within Salesforce, really kind of building it out. And then it came to the point where it was like, okay, we want to start building out. Now we're not just looking at like, oh, we're opening 3 floors. We were literally opening entire buildings at a time. So the 25 floors in this building, and then another 30 floors in this building, and then another 30 floors in that building over a period of 4 years. And so it wasn't just like, okay, we'll just move this team there once they get there. It was now, okay, 3 years down the road, what do we want to look like? And so you kind of have to you go to that end game of like 5 years down the road. If we're going to be in all these buildings, how do we want to be set up? And then having to back it into like, well, then how do we get there from here? Yeah. And so building out like quarter by quarter, which teams are moving where? Is that going to keep up with their growth? How do we get them in there? And then once you kind of map off that, now you're working with a construction team. It's like, well, different teams have different requirements. So how are we designing the space for that? And so it became such a massive puzzle that you were trying to figure out, which kept me completely interested in it, because it was, I love the puzzle aspect to the work. It's like, how do you solve for this incredibly complicated problem? All while knowing what I'm deciding right now, and probably 12 months from now, it's going to change because there's going to be a different direction. And so, like, how can you create about like build in that flexibility to respond at the same time?
Yeah.
So so that's why I think maybe for me, it's why I've been able to stay at companies for so long, because of what I've been involved with. Like, I knew 6 months from any decision I make right now, 6 months from now, we're probably going to have to revisit, figure out how to tweak it and change it. And so it always kind of keeps it interesting.
Yeah. I can see why that would be a great intellectual challenge to try and play that long game and have that vision and have that clarity of end game while knowing that you'd need to be adaptable as you go.
Yeah. And you just have to be okay with change and not get flustered by what you just spent probably, months of your life trying to solve for. And then someone to swoop in and be like, actually, we're going to do this.
Rip it up.
Yeah. Just not take it personally.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of more recent shenanigans in the world of workplace, I think there's been so much drama around RTO and really all the mandate wars, the clickbait headlines. They've become, I think they've become a bit of a distraction more than anything else, But my worry is that we almost go backwards, as in we forget that many people work flexibly for years, decades even, and suddenly the Eye of Sauron has fixed firmly upon both underutilization and on who shows up when. Now, the underutilization thing is fair enough and positive because, we don't want to be wasting loads of budget and emissions and on underused space. But the who shows up when thing, I'm not so sure about. I mean, they go hand in hand to some extent, as you need to model who's likely to show up when in order to avoid, I guess, baking excessive slack into your space plans and therefore the underutilization. But I know that over a decade ago, you were dealing with flexible seating, moving away from assigned seats, creating neighborhoods, dialing up sharing ratios. So what's your view on all that? What's the hype and what really matters and what people should be focusing on?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people have a bit of a short-term memory when it comes
Don't
to
they?
how the workplace was evolving already. Everyone just feels like this very thing, like it's all a response to COVID, and like everyone shut down, and so nobody was going to the office, and now we can't get people back in, and we have all these flexible models, and now like it's not working for us, and people don't realize, it was 10 years before COVID ever hit that we had already started moving towards flexible models and working.
Yeah.
Like we had rolled out hot desk seating for most organizations. We had created neighborhoods. All of this, we were already starting to program in and understanding, well, on average, how many days a week are these organizations coming in? So let's create a ratio in seating. We'll do flex seating. And now we don't have to give them as many desks because we know they're not all going to be on site at one time. We would already move down that model. That was already happening in the workplace. And so then, and of course, there was still the noise because this was the switch from probably before I started really in this space. It was kind of that transition when it was coming from kind of more that old style cubicle world even.
Yeah.
Where someone, had their desk and they kind of have the walls around them and they kind of had their own little private space to really moving more into that open workspace where it was just like desks next to each other. And you didn't have offices on the window line. All the offices were now being pulled to the interior and conference rooms in the interior to create the natural light. And a lot of that driven by studies on, what makes a better workplace and what's healthier for people. And you want the natural light. So we were already starting to make those changes. That's kind of like when I came into this world, this corporate world. And so that path had already started. There was already starting to get, feedback from people where it's like, are we swinging too far? And is the pendulum going to come back? And everyone's like, the open workspace is too noisy and too crowded and I can't concentrate and I need my private space. And are we going to swing back and start delivering all the offices?
Yeah.
So all those debates were already happening, going back and forth, but nobody had really started to everyone still kind of was trending on the open workspace. Nobody was kind of going back to the big cubicles. And then COVID hits, and then it blows up the whole model where it's now nobody's in the office. Then it's now, okay, we'll come back in. And by this point, especially, and I come from the tech world mostly. And so part of the whole, like, in those years in the 2010s, the big selling point for tech was like, oh, we're in the cloud. Look at how mobile we can be. You can work from anywhere. Like you can do it from your phone now. You should be able to run your whole business from your phone. I mean, I was told that so many times.
Yeah.
It's now the world has created a system where it's designed to be flexible. Like we're preaching to you that like, oh, look at the flexibility we're bringing into the world, and you can work from anywhere. And then suddenly when people start to take advantage of it, it's like, oh, wait, hold on. And then COVID hits, and it becomes really clear that people can work from everywhere. You have now built out that work environment that has made that possible, and it works for people. And it wasn't just, and I think a lot of that was also, people realized it wasn't just what was happening in the workplace. It was also, a much more global socioeconomic thing, especially like in the US here, where housing prices were starting to, become exponentially more expensive, especially in major urban hubs, which kind of coincides with like the big tech hubs. And so a lot of people were starting to be forced to move outside of the city. So now commutes were starting to get longer. Yeah. And so it became this work-life balance, quality of life. It's like, I don't want to spend my whole life commuting. And it's not really an option for me to live near where my office is. And so you get this sprawl. So I think all these things were taking place where now they're realized, like, I'm at home. Oh, I don't have to spend all this time commuting. I'm still able to do my job. Why do I need to go back to that world that you've already kind of built out, making it possible for me to do this? So I think that's kind of what, a lot of the big fight. I know there's a lot of different groups where it's just like, it's a losing battle. You're not going to get certain groups back in the office. It's just not. And there's a lot of people who are like not going to apply for a role if they're going to be expected to be in the office. So then it becomes the game of, well, how do you make people want to come back to the office? It's like, what can you do in this space that makes it worthwhile? So that's, I feel like, where we are now.
Yeah, because most people want to see their colleagues and spend time together, at least some of the time. And it does depend, by and large, how bad your commute is. If you live in the Bahamas and your nearest office is in New York, obviously, maybe once a quarter. But if you live 2 blocks away, it's a different story. So yeah, it's interesting how much of an advantage companies have. They're offering more autonomy and flexibility in terms of the global talent pool.
Yeah, well, in the global talent, I mean, you think about it, all the teams are so distributed now. Mm-hmm. I mean, it used to be like if you were on a team, generally people were hiring for the people that were in their market, in their office. And so your team would all be sitting together. And that's just, I mean, funny enough, like my particular small team where I work now, we're all based in the Bay Area. We're probably the only team I can think of in our, like, I know within like a greater workplace where it's like we're all at the same location, because nobody is on any team. So it's like by the very nature of where you've hired people, you can't be in person together unless it's an on-site or some event. Like you have to plan for it.
Yeah.
And so you've kind of built in, we're going to have to work virtually together. It's the only way this team is going to work, because we don't sit together.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like all these things that you're trying to solve for. And now when we're building out spaces, and we know that because, we've worked with your company and we have sensors in all our spaces. So we really understand how, spaces are being utilized. And, average conference room, I mean, the average number of people in a meeting is 2 to 3 people, regardless of how big that conference room is.
That's so true.
And so, because at least half the people in that meeting are going to be virtual.
Yeah.
And it's not even just because, they decided not to come into the office today. It's like they may be in an office, but they're going to be in a different office because they don't live in the same city you do.
Yeah.
So now it's like, well, how are we designing spaces to support that type of work? Because the old models of the way you distributed like conference room ratios and things like that, none of that holds up anymore. Yeah. And I don't know if as much as they want to return to office 5 days a week, as mentioned before, that doesn't mean they're all going into the same office.
Yeah, that's true.
They may be going in 5 days a week, but now they're in 6 different offices across the globe because they live all over the place. So it's still going to be virtual presence at all these meetings.
Yeah. And it is so true. You get it's all the small meetings, people want more private space. We did an occupancy index recently looking at all the data, companies all over the world. And there's just these common patterns that, you've got too many big rooms, not enough small private spaces. There's higher demand, rising demand for, collaboration in social spaces. And there's reducing demand for assigned desks. And people are generally not too keen on open plan, although there were studies many years ago that said that open plan actually reduced collaboration. So end up sending emails to the person next to them, I think. So it's fun. It's interesting that these patterns, I think there's still a lot of organizations struggling to make those changes, though. We see in our data loads of companies who have, so many single or two-person meetings, or somebody using a space because they need a bit of privacy to make some calls, or two people having a meeting in a 10, 12-person conference room. What do you think gets in people's way when they try and address these challenges? Is it the flexibility of the space and the difficulty to actually physically change it, or how come these patterns come up, but it's not always obvious that they're being solved, at least not very quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just the physical space attribute.
Yeah.
Because you can't, I mean, if where I am now, we've been doing a lot of, it's kind of like you're moving into new space. So now you can build out the space to support that.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in an existing space, it's really hard to, I mean, you're going to have to shut down half the office and spend a lot of money. And it's like,
it's the disruption.
Now it's like, you can't, I mean, a lot of it comes to accounting stuff where it's like now it's capital expense. What can we, amortize over the length of a lease? It's like, well, now we're already in the lease. There's only a few years left. So this is all just going to be like straight cash paying. Like there's so many things that go into the decision, which makes sense. It's like, is it worth the amount of money it's going to cost? So it's tough. And we have, like in my current role, we definitely have some offices that we know aren't built to, it's kind of what we call our, like an older style design that aren't built to the current way we work. And we know that, but you have to sit there and weigh. It's like, does it make sense to just wait until we know we have to get a new space and we move and then we can build out the space properly? Or do we go back and do we redo the current space we're in, knowing how disruptive that's going to be, the cost on that? And sometimes just the way the space is laid out, it's not feasible, or even it's like you're going to put a Band-Aid on it, and it's like, when maybe we just leave earlier. So there's all those decisions you're trying to weigh in. It's like, what is the most cost-effective, best use of resources is actually going to deliver the best ways? I mean, you have to weigh all those things, and sometimes the best answer is like, it's not the time. Like, we're just going to have to figure out how to operate within the space as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, because everyone's obviously wants to be adaptable, and there's all this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and a lot of workplace leaders, they have their eye on the prize of, like, multi-use space and building flexibility into space, but it is hard when you're not built for that adaptability. And we talk about experimental test and learn approaches to change quite a bit, but ripping down walls and disrupting people is a different story. So when you think about real multi-use spaces that are inherently flexible, what does that really look like?
Throughout my career, it's like we've tried so many of those like different furniture solutions where you're like, oh, we'll set up this section of the floor, pilot this program, and we'll try this. And you're always trying these things just to see how they work. And sometimes you move forward with them. But even within those, it's kind of like they're set in place. It's not like something that you're hacking every day, where it's like, oh, they came in, they want to work like this. How do we shift this around? And even if you built in that furniture, 95% of the time, that flexible furniture, you'll go day in, day out, it's sitting the same exact way it was the day before.
I bet. I never thought of that.
People don't people rarely come in. They don't like move things around. They just kind of they see it set there, they're going to use it there, and if that's not, they're going to go find somewhere else to sit. It's like people
It's not Wes Anderson
this
movie.
space live. Yeah. So I mean that's exactly. It's like that's just not how people generally are wired when they walk into a space. It's like, oh, I'm going to move all the furniture around and make this setup best for me. They're just going to look and figure out which one is set up closest to how they want to work, and that's what they're going to hop into.
Yeah.
So we do have like, we set up kind of like multi-purpose rooms where they can act for like training rooms or classroom style, and you do have flexible furniture. But all those things, it's not as simple as like, oh, we'll just put in all this furniture in and let it work itself. It's like, no, you need to figure out the operations behind that. Who's making all those furniture changes? Who's running that? Like, and so it's not as simple as like, let's just put this furniture in here. It's like there's a whole system behind it that you have to have in place. And so you have to think of the top to bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for the most part, you kind of just, it's always good to try out these furniture solutions and new things, because sometimes you do find some things that's like, oh, actually, like people do really prefer this type of seating or this type of desk, or clearly they don't want this. I feel like more often than not, we find out people don't want this.
And what?
Yeah.
Or just get 300 of those.
Exactly.
I think Pinterest offices are the envy of the workplace design universe. Many of those, not to mention workers, they're really beautiful, some of those offices, and they seem to be really thoughtfully designed for end users. And I know you had this big rethink in the office kind of shift after COVID towards people working however they want and reducing assigned seats and everything, which is it's quite inspiring from a change management perspective, actually. Not to mention the design and construction and planning perspective. And I'm sure that required a new concept on how to plan and program.
Yeah, it was a completely new concept. So I started at Pinterest, was it 2021? So like a year into COVID, and essentially was brought in to help figure out what does our return to office? What is it going to look like? Because right now, I mean, our offices weren't even open. So nobody was even open at this point. And so I mean, it was months working at Pinterest before I ever stepped foot inside a Pinterest office, because none of them were open. And it was the first thing. It was like, okay, when people come back, what are they even expecting? Because when they had left, Pinterest was still in a one-to-one desking model. Everyone had a dedicated seat. Everybody was in the office. So it was like kind of they weren't even in with like the flex seating model yet. Like, so they were still like in a little bit older methodology. And so what I was kind of tasked was like, how do we roll out a much more flexible strategy coming back in? Mm-hmm. So it was we're just doing neighborhoods now. Nobody has an assigned seat. How much real estate do we actually need at this point coming back? And it's still early on, so nobody was quite sure what it was going to look like. And it was a very flexible return to office strategy at the time. And so it became a first step kind of change management. How do we communicate to everybody? It's like, hey, when you come back in the office, it's going to be different. Like the way you were working before, it's not going to be the same. And here's what to expect. Before I had even started, they had already started pulling out workstations and adding in more flexible furniture and open spaces and things, kind of already knowing that it's going that way. It was going that direction. And so we really kind of went full force into it. And so we got back people into the office, and it was a year or two, and it was working fine because it was a very slow trickle and return to office. And then it came to the next phase where it was like, okay, now we're starting to have leases roll off, and we're going to start building out new spaces. So now that we're building out new spaces, what can we do as a completely new approach? And that's where I really got into more of creating like a programming model and designing an entire, like what I call a size estimator. It's this calculator that essentially spits out based on all what we expect in the office, what we need to support it. And kind of one of the biggest changes that I went with was, instead of just looking at headcount, I was really starting to focus on demand.
Yeah.
So let's look at like how people, who's actually using the office and design it for them, not just at our population. And so, and because the way people were using offices had started to change, it wasn't just for day to day work. Now it was a lot more, oh, in order to get people in, well, let's host an on-site. Oh, we're going to have an event. It's a lot more like they really saw it as like, okay, if you're going to come into the office, we want it to be about collaboration because we now know you can do most of your work at home. It's sitting at your own desk. So now, but we want people to come together. And so we have to kind of create ways to get people into the office. So now you're kind of changing what the reason people were coming into the office for. So it's like, well, how do you build an office that supports that kind of work? Because if you had that old model, which was, 50, 60% of the space is all workstations. Well, that's not designed to support if someone's having a massive on-site or an event coming there. It's like, well, you don't have the space for that. You don't have these large flexible rooms or other event spaces to support that. So it was a real change in the complete approach of what the office looks like. So instead of 50, 60% workstations, we'll go 10 to 15% workstations. Our collaboration space is going to be, 30, 40% of the profile instead of 15, 20%. And so all these different metrics, like changing them and kind of matching them to how people are using them and kind of understanding, well, who was coming to the office? It's not just employees who live there. We have a lot more visiting employees because people are traveling a lot more on site because they also don't live in market as much as they used to. And then you're bringing a lot of guests because they're hosting events. And so let's take that full big picture of what that demand is. So it's all those different people using the office, and let's design for that instead of just the local population sitting at their desk going to meetings. And so that was kind of where we made this huge shift. And really like how I built out that calculator is like spit out like, okay, if I have all these metrics and we know attendance rates and guest rates and all these demand, like what do we need to then program the office to support that?
Yeah.
And that's where we are now. And then the whole design size, I mean, that's just like the brilliance of our design and construction team. Yeah. My boss and my other two compatriots on my team who are really brilliant at what they do and build these incredible spaces.
Yeah.
And I just try to take a little credit for it because I was there, even though I didn't do it.
With your model of demand.
Yeah.
I do think the demand modeling, to geek out for a minute, is kind of interesting though. I mean, it's something we've been working on at Hubstar with our dynamic planning solution, not least because demand modeling in many ways is just never really worked. It's always been really hard forever. And then now it's pretty much impossible, in terms of the old way. This whole rigmarole of go around business unit by business unit, trying to do forecasts, often manual, often offline, based on head count, which is not the best proxy anymore. That was wonky, I guess, long before hybrid work happened en masse, and it seems fairly broken now. So it's interesting. You've done some work on methodology around demand, and it's a topic that. It's like we're on the verge of we can crack this demand model now using technology in ways that were probably not possible before, or at least we hadn't had the sense of urgency around the fact that headcount and one-to-one seating no longer works to drive us forward in a way.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, kind of. I mean, a lot of it, some of it's just like the math behind it. It was kind of like, okay, you're going to create this demand model that it's going to vary so much and change so much. So it's like, how do you create a program that's going to support all this change that you're kind of expecting? And knowing that you don't have great data, because I mean, you look at like the very basics of it when we look at like headcount growth projections. And like you mentioned, you're talking to business units and they're saying, yeah, we're going to hire this many people and this many people. And they're telling you that, and then you're talking to HR and they're saying like, well, we have this many heads out. And then you talk to the finance team and they're like, well, their budget's only approved for this. So first off, you're still trying to like at the very beginning to try to track it out. It's like, okay, where am I getting the real answer there? And now you add on to this, the idea that, I mean, you talk to any HR function and when they're posting a job, 99% of them, it's not as if like this role, San Francisco, they'll list 10 different cities in 10 different locations. So it's like, yeah, maybe that team is hiring 25 people, but we have no idea where those 25 people are going to end up.
Yeah.
So now you like that complete like gray area of, as much as we have these numbers, we know they're not good numbers like from the start. So, and just building out the demand model was like, well, how do you create some sort of formula that can kind of capture all that noise and still set you up to be able to absorb all these changes? And so what I looked at was like, okay, I'm going to take, since typical patterns tends to be that like 3-day a week in office. And then when you look at an office, you kind of see, and everyone's got that bell curve of like most offices, Monday, Friday are really quiet. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday tend to be busy, although that varies in different locations. We have some locations where Monday is by far the busiest day. So I was like, okay, well, let's look at the 3 busiest days in the office, regardless of like what day of the week. We'll just take those 3 busiest days. And then when we calculate that demand, I'm going to look at the 80th percentile. So I'm going to try to capture kind of the busier days. So that like, that's what we're kind of programming to and really trying to support, knowing that on occasion, there is that one-off day where they're going to have a massive event or something's going to happen and it's just going to be super busy in the office. And we can't build offices to support 3 days a year. Like that's just not practical. Yeah. So you kind of create that like, okay, we're going to try to capture most use cases of the office. And that's what we're going to design to. So that's really kind of the approach I took was like, okay, kind of bigger envelope, but not the extreme. And so and because as you see these patterns, one thing I've learned over the last couple of years is that now we get these headcount growths, as you're growing by 10%, 15%. And what we're realizing is like headcount growth has a much smaller impact on office utilization than actually changes in attendance patterns.
Yeah.
Because if you're only coming in 30% of the time, you hire 100 heads, that's still very few people coming in. Yeah. But if they go from 25% attendance to 50% attendance, now you have a mass influx on demand on the office.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like, it's kind of where the trick is. It's like, how are we going to understand how people are going to be using the spaces in the future? Like, what are the behavior changes that we're predicting? And that's so much tougher because people are not easy to predict.
Yeah.
And you try things and you'll see, and I mean, it's all out there in the news when you talk to like any company, anybody who's studying this, and they're in, we're going from 3 days to 4 days return to office. And then they look at their attendance and it's like,
did we?
It's highest marginal uptick. It's like people, and you start to realize it's like, it was this misnomer. We go back to like this pre-COVID thing where we thought like everybody was coming in 5 days a week. It's like, they weren't. Nobody had a 5-day a week mandate. And nobody thought like, well, you haven't been in 5 days a week. And if you look at any attendance, it was like the best you were ever getting was 75% attendance rate. 75%.
Yeah, utilization was always terrible.
It was always. It's never been that high. And so it's like now, but people have convinced themselves that like, oh no, everybody should be in the office every day. And I was like, nobody was ever in the office every day between vacations and PTO and sick and working, going to clients, going to on-sites, going to conferences. It's like people have work that happens outside of the office regardless of like, I'm working at home.
Yeah.
And it was like how we were able to go to flex seating 10 years ago because we understood that. Mm-hmm. We understood that like there were different ratios and it's based on like different work functions. Everybody wasn't in the office at the time. So it's kind of, maybe we're talking about it differently now because now it's just like return to office or these in-office mandates. But it's the similar behavior pattern there was prior to all of this started.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. We just weren't giving it, or at least many organizations weren't giving it the same level of attention. But I think it is, and as space planners have got a completely different challenge now as well, because like you say, the dialing up of the headcount doesn't really translate into attendance. I mean, we've been working on sort of these models of demand that are automated, so you can just look at by team or by any group of buildings or whatever level, you can see that the demand modeled in terms of who's expected to come in. And then you can see, oh, this is how we're allocating space, and does that look about right? And then you look at and you see the actuals as well. And then it's a new game, isn't it? It's like, how did what I thought would happen, or did it not? And therefore, what do I need to do about it? It's that kind of thought. And then also, I guess the other part of the change is the cyclical nature of it. I know that a lot of, especially larger organizations, obviously with many offices all over the place, it was always this big annual planning process to try and most of that time was consumed with trying to model demand, really, wasn't it? All that business unit stuff and trying to figure out. And that could take like 3 months in a year. And so it's all, then by the time you're done, you've done a new acquisition or something's changed, and then you start all over again. And so I guess the change is being able to dynamically just, oh, something's changed, boom, run a scenario again. That's the thing, isn't it? It's not like we can't really do this big annual thing anymore. We just kind of need it to be more on demand. I guess that's one shift.
Yeah, and it is. And that's kind of my world now, is essentially creating scenario models for the same site over and over every quarter. And doing it really. And I guess part of the change is also, it's very, very site by site now. Like, you really are looking at offices individually because of different behaviors in different locations, whether it be the team, cultural, how they like to behave. Like, that like there's certain things where in Tokyo, the way they use the office and culturally, like the way they view the office is very different than, all these American cities.
Yeah.
And so the way, like, their attendance patterns are very different. And so it's all these kinds of things that you're starting to understand. And like, you can't just have a one size fits all program or plan now, because we really are creating these really flexible work sites and offices that you do have to kind of, it's a little more bespoke in the planning.
It's complex
than it used to be. Yeah.
And it does feel in many ways like the whole workplace game is going through a fundamental upgrade. The pressure around utilization and then the rise of tools, the rise of data enabling us to do more sophisticated things, and that shift we're talking about from the long, slow planning to the kind of always on, more dynamic on demand stuff. And in some ways, it reminds me of the shift that other disciplines have been through, like marketing, for example. You used to print some brochures and take some clients golfing, and I'm exaggerating, but then it became, you got all these really sophisticated CRMs and all these different online channels and new tools and automation, and that was all the norm. And I guess it's the same in HR as well. It was more of a back office function with payroll and recruitment, and then you got new levels of sophistication and higher bar and sort of employee engagement and the understanding of that, and the data, the adaptability. Would you agree it's happening now in the workplace, it's kind of going through this shift?
Yeah, and completely. And there was just recently, we were talking to, like, one of the biggest changes I've seen is like within engineering and being in this tech world. One of the biggest things, 10, 15 years ago, it was Scrum and stand-ups, and we had to build out all these spaces because those engineering teams were meeting daily in person. And we have these special flexible rooms with like whiteboards in all spaces because they had all these post-it, it was like this very in-person, how do we drive building these products? And they needed to be in person daily and have these sprint meetings. And it was like
stand-ups where you actually stand up.
Stand up, yeah. You're literally in this, all need to be in this room.
We don't stand up and not stand-ups anymore. We sit at a desk.
And now none of that all of that is now virtual. Yeah. And they don't do that in person. And in fact, talking to like engineer leadership recently, they're saying like, oh no, we're never, like, that's not ever coming back. Like, we don't need to be in person for that anymore. Like, the systems have developed to support it wherever they are. And so it's like, that was like one specific where we would have countless number of spaces dedicated, built for that specific purpose. And that purpose no longer exists.
Yeah.
And so like so there are like really drastic ways in that just basic work functions for teams have changed over the last few years. And And if you keep thinking like it's not coming back, it's like they've moved on to a better, more efficient model. So it's like you're constantly having to reinvent and pay attention to what's actually happening in the office now.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole thing does seem to be more data driven now. I mean, you've always been into the data and the models and the and that intellectual challenge. But I think there's a lot of organizations that just weren't really focusing so much on the utilization data or the attendance data until more recently. It just didn't seem to be like so common. Now they've got data coming out of their ears and they don't know what to do with it. It's the opposite problem.
Yeah,
It's like trying to unify and make sense of. And yeah.
There's so much data now and from so many different sources. And I mean, I think that's the tough part. It's like you're getting so much data and it's like, how do you even know what to do with it? And then how do you clean it in a way that it makes sense and not react to it? Too. It's like if something you see something like if some number pops out, and you're like, oh well, that's terrible. We got to respond to that. And it's like, well, hold up, let's figure out like what's going on. And I think that's a lot of. But I also think data is massively important in the way it kind of support the decisions because we don't have to rely on like anecdotes anymore. You know, you hear people in an office saying like, oh, I can't find a desk. There is no desk. And then you start looking at the numbers and you're like, well, I mean, we show that there's always desks available. So was it just that particular day they happen to come in? Or is it the fact which we hear a lot more now, and it's like, oh, this is going to be tough as we get busier in these offices, is that people are so accustomed when they do come into the office and they're sitting at a desk that they have like an entire pod to themselves. There's no one else around them.
Yeah.
And so once we start getting people back sitting next to each other, people are like, they're like, it's loud here. I need my space. And it's like, well, we can't. It's like, I think people have become so used to like having their own home office where it's quiet. It's set up exactly how they like. And so that's going to be the next, as like, you know, you see all these return to office and you get more and more people in, which will be good. But as these offices get busier, it's going to be, I know we're going to start to hear a lot of people and the noise complaints coming back about how loud it is and how busy it is. And so that's where we are responding and kind of building out, like we have these things, focus rooms, which are kind of individual desk rooms, you know, closed door or focus booth, where it's like a little booth, a little more of a private space that people can use. And the number of like those types of spaces that we're building in a space are like, I mean, just
many more
factors. And then the accounts, I mean, it's 10x what we used to kind of put in an office because we understand like we need those. But once again, they're for individuals, like one, maybe two people, because that's what we're trying to support in those type of spaces. We don't need as many meeting rooms.
And I know you've obviously got a lot of experience with utilization studies as well, because that's something you've worked on with Hubstar. But I'm sure there's many folks that will listen to this and that are using sensors for short-term studies, maybe placing them strategically in key spaces for the longer term as well. And then maybe they lay on Wi-Fi or to get that portfolio-wide view, or at least down to neighborhood level. And then you've got booking data, then you're running over to security, getting badge data, and that can all end up pretty challenging in the sense that the fragmented data that's sort of pulled manually into BI tools and spreadsheets, and sometimes it feels like it takes so long to get that together. I know this is a lot. I hear this a lot with attendance data when people are trying to measure whether people are attending in line with the policy or not. They end up, by the time they've got the ink dries on the data, it feels like it's out of date, and people don't feel super confident standing behind the data when it comes to big decisions. There are a few things, I don't know if you can share anything there. It'd be great to hear your view on what works, what doesn't, what you think anybody listening might find useful if it's something that they're looking at, or more broadly, any advice on the issue of fragmented data, maybe slowing down or reducing confidence in decisions. So you'd end up just kind of not, the worst case, I guess, no decision at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. So for me, I do use the badge data to understand who's coming in. So you just kind of get a clean picture of who's coming in, how often, what teams are coming in. And then the way my approach has been to kind of overlay the sensor data on top of that to then, if you kind of get a picture of how many people are in the space, and then you kind of understand how the space is actually being used with the sensor data. It's helped me drive certain calculations and understanding like actual desk requirements and meeting room requirements and focus room requirements for understanding. It's like, well, okay, at what point do we see the desks getting full utilization? It's like, when is there ever a point in a day where every desk is in use or close to in use? And so you kind of, once you see like, okay, well, on these certain days, it's like they hit, full capacity this day, full capacity this day, this time. And then you kind of compare that against like, well, how many people are in the office at the time? So you start to kind of triangulate, saying like, okay, well, now we're starting to see this picture of once we get to like this certain number in the office, this particular resource is being maxed out.
Yeah.
And so then you can start to see like how these demand and change patterns, like, okay, if they start coming in at like this cadence on a regular basis, we know this often we're going to be out of space. So now we need to look at like, when do we need to deliver more desks? And so that's kind of how I've been building up my models to understand like growth in certain markets and when we need to expand or when an office is going to hit capacity, is really now like diving deep into the different types of spaces and uses and knowing that like, okay, based on these use patterns and like this growth and this attendance rate and how many desks we have, like based on the calculations, maybe 18 months from now, desks are going to be maxed out. Like they're no longer going to be able to support the demand in the office.
Yeah.
But maybe the focus rooms, it's 12 months from now. Yeah. So you're now able to like split out the types of spaces that we see because we understand like people are using the spaces differently. And then we think like, okay, well, if we expand in, 18 months, now we know we need to program in more focus rooms into that expansion space, a certain number of desks. You can kind of start to like actually create a program, what you need to build out to support the space. Instead of just like, okay, well, we have this space here, we're expanding by 20,000 square feet. Okay, let's just create that same template in the next expansion space. It's like now we're actually able to understand what we need to deliver in that expansion space to like fully round out the office and to keep pace with the way they're using it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's definitely, as much as I would love for the tools at this point to be like, give me the answer, click a button. It's like, no, it is a lot of number crunching in the background and really kind of creating your own formulas that are specific to your company. Everything is so like specific to how you're using it. So that's just kind of how I've been layering the data on. When it comes to booking data, I actually find that almost useless, to be honest. Because even if a lot of people aren't booking, even if they book, they don't show up. If they book, well, was it one person at a meeting or was it 8? And like, you can tell me how many people were on the meeting, but I have no idea who logged in. And it's like, oh, maybe you can look at who was on their computer. It's like, well, half the people in the office. I mean, every meeting I'm in, half the time, I'm in a conference room, we're looking at it, and there's someone sitting at their desk in the same office taking the call because they didn't want to get up and come into the meeting room. So it's like, it's all those things where you're sort of like, it's like, well, what am I going to do with this data if it's not really telling me anything. It's just telling me that this particular room happened to be booked at a time. And you can overlay that and try to, the sensor data where you're like, okay, well, how many people are actually in this room?
Actually showed up.
And so, And so I think there is a lot of opportunity there. It's just, it's pretty in-depth, I think, calculations that I haven't seen it being able to be like easily pulled from the system yet. So it's because a lot of these systems, it's like we have all the sensor data, but I can't necessarily import all my booking data into the sensor tool. Or again, my sensor tool, it's like, so do we pull it all out? Yeah, now we're looking at it's like pulling all that data into, a different platform to then try to create that single source. And it's like we're looking like, well, could AI potentially solve for this? And I think there is a lot of opportunity there. I don't think it's there quite yet because every time I try to drop something into like we use Helix, which is essentially ChatGPT enterprise version, and it's like I drop in these data model, like these sensor data pools, And it's so much data that it crashes the system. It's basically like, it's too much. It's like, I'm like, but I need all of this. So you do sometimes have to go back to like the old school, like, well, let me clean and process it and get it to a certain clean, simplified version. And then I can have the AI tool really help me drive some findings from it.
Yeah, the tooling is interesting. With our utilization platform, we end up doing a lot of data unification. It's like these patented algorithms that sort of unify badge and Wi-Fi, but yeah, it's certainly a lot of people do find there's definitely not a lack of data that's the problem. But I agree, the AI thing is very interesting. The AI thing is something that we're applying on the dynamic planning side, and yeah, it's getting to the point now. I think in some ways, the LLM thing is we forget about the beauty of machine learning sometimes, and get slightly off course sometimes with the LLM stuff. The agentic AI is interesting, but yeah, I mean, I know that you're obviously a workplace innovator type, so I imagine, like me, you probably get quite excited about the possibilities of AI. And the LLMs have their horror stories, but when they're set loose. But the potential for predictive modeling is really interesting. That's kind of an obvious use case for automation, given that with the level of complexity and the amount of manual work that's involved. So, do you have any other thoughts on the AI thing and the AI in corporate real estate or workplace in the near term, or maybe a longer term dream?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like maybe corporate real estate is always a little behind the curve. Like it's always kind of like one step behind when you have all these innovations. I think part of it is
that long term thing.
Yeah. And so I just think there are a lot of opportunities because I think more and more, as we talked about, it's about the data.
Mm-hmm.
And so as more and more companies get into this space and realize how much of this and these answers we're trying to come up with need to be rooted in data, because you have to be able to point to something as to why you made a decision.
Yeah.
And
not just
much as not just a feeling, not just because someone's mentioned something or someone told you or you heard. It's like, how do you, like in any other business, be able to point to like, this is actually the data we have, what we've seen. We've come up with this methodology. Are we all in agreement that that's the sound methodology? Like,
well, that's important because the alignment thing is a problem, isn't it, internally?
And that was that was a big thing. Like, you just in like when we're come up with this demand modeling and like how we were going to approach demand and sizing for offices and program for offices, it was you had to go get the buy-in from leadership all the way up to the top to be like, this is how we are creating our model. This is how we are looking at it. This is how we're planning to it. Are we aligned that like, yes, this is how we want to move forward with it? And getting them to understand like how we're defining certain things, how we're defining attendance, how we're defining demand, how we're programming to support that. And like, what does this mean? Especially it's like, we're planning to all these certain behaviors that we're seeing and what the data is showing us. If there is some sort of drastic change, know that everything that we plan to is going to change. So it's like these offices that we've built will not support that. Like, are we all in agreement that we are planning for the way we are behaving now? And we're not seeing, and you get enough data at a certain point where you don't see drastic changes, like the behavior has somewhat stabilized.
Yeah.
So we feel a little comfortable. But it is the alignment. And then being able to point back, it's like, we agreed, like, that's what we were aligned on. We all understood this, that we were planning to. Here's the data that supports like all of these decisions. And so I think that's, being able to point to something.
Yeah.
And make that decision. Yeah.
It is one of the toughest challenges, isn't it? I think I was doing a webinar the other week and we run a little poll and it was something about the biggest barriers that are holding me back from change as a workplace leader. And it was like, boom, everybody, stakeholder alignment. That's the barrier to change, getting people on the same page. That was the big one. And it's so, and that, I guess that's something that has changed in recent years, is this blending, I guess, of the workplace people in the sense that you have CRE folks who didn't think so much about experience before suddenly having to think about people stuff a lot more, or you have HR leaders who are suddenly having to think about spacey things a bit more, and none of that has like a shared data set and a shared language. And then you've got the exec who, and how do you explain space geek stuff to a team that is not familiar with anything to do with floor plans and demand modeling and all that stuff? So it's quite a challenge. I think that's a huge barrier for getting things done, is just finding that common language and maybe that common data set to try and that everyone actually has a grasp of. So it needs to be abstracted, I guess, to the right level of detail. That's definitely something we've been working on and helping people with, is that visualization of this, this demand and this allocation and this actual, so you can actually explain it to somebody who's not spent their life immersed in Spaceland. It's not easy, is it?
No, it's not easy. And especially when you're like, okay, you got 15 minutes. This is not a 15-minute conversation.
No.
So, yeah. And because of how rapidly changing everything is, and knowing that you have to build in flexibility, it's like you have to be able to show, it's like, I mean, we're modeling out all these potential options. It's like, if we go this route, it's like we need this much space and this much programming. And it's like, or this, or this. And we have all these, and like, oh, and here's the old school model of if like we did it based on head count and just, 200 square foot per head in a market. And so it's like you're trying to show like all these different places where you could live and why it is you're choosing this specific line to plan to. And so it's like, how do you distill that down into a one slide? And it is tough. And so that's where I think of the alignment up ahead, where it's like you have to have a leader who's willing to like kind of stop, take that pause and be like, okay, let's have a meeting or a point where we can discuss like the actual methodology behind this, so we're all on the same page and understand it. So then from here on out, every time I see this thing and I'm consistent and like we're presenting consistently the same way, like they now know what they're looking at and instantly can see and like be like, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it.
This has changed.
And so, yeah. And like, oh, this is, and so I'm like, okay, I understand why that would cause an impact. And so, but it's that upfront alignment where it's like, you have to have that conversation and like kind of spell it out. And so that going down the line, the rest are going to have the same questions every time you go in there. And they're going to be like, well, why are we doing this? Well, what about this?
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't have that kind of time with leaders when you're trying to get approval.
Yeah.
So it has to just be like, make sure they understand it up front and then never have to revisit that conversation unless something changes.
Yeah. Good advice. And something you touched on already, but I wanted to come back to in case you had any thoughts, is the spiky attendance. Obviously a lot of people that listen to this, they're going to be wrestling with common challenges, and one of these is the classic spiky lumpy attendance. Nobody comes in on Monday or Friday, being the classic, and the big peak midweek, meeting room Hunger Games. So do you have any advice that you would offer to people who are facing the lumpy spiky conundrum as they try to operationalize demand?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is, that's why I went with that 80th percentile model, because it was like, okay, let's try to capture most use cases. If you're capturing almost most use cases, and then it's like there's the one-offs, people tend to understand. It's like, oh, we had this, like, oh, it's a super busy day. And so that's kind of, I definitely don't want to do the average. I don't want half the time for people to have a bad experience in the office. So it's like,
yeah. Oh, the average looks great. We've got exactly the right thing.
So one of the interesting things that like I learned is that you also have to like help explain. It's like, yes, we're going to be capturing higher, that 80th percentile percentage. So it's like the heavier uses of the office, what we're planning to, and we're planning to demand. And obviously the way we're building out these offices to support that, it actually is going to require more square foot per person in the office. So instead of, 200 square foot per person, you're now looking at more like 350 square foot per person. So it's like suddenly you're like, okay, well, now we have a bigger real estate portfolio. And it's like, no, but the offset is that we are planning to demand, not to head count. Yeah. So now we're planning to just people in the office versus the number of people. So it's like 1,000 people in a location. If you're planning to now 400 heads on a typical use case, or that 80th percentile use case, versus 1,000 heads. Well, 400 at 350 square feet is a lot less than 1,000 at 200 square feet. So you're able to actually reduce the portfolio a bit, not to the scale of like, oh, people are only coming in 2 days a week, so let's cut the portfolio by 65%. It's like, no, you're not.
Better
You
be a
can't do
problem
that.
on the Wednesday.
Yeah. So it is kind of understanding where that, like, where's your target? Like, yes, we can create savings. Yes, we can bring our portfolio down. Yes, we can streamline. But to a certain point where we're streamlining to still be able to support the way we're going to be using these offices. So it's kind of a best of both worlds without trying to be too aggressive or trying to be too much of a hero, being like, oh, look how much I saved. Look how much we cut the portfolio by. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? And then everyone's like, well, yeah, but there's nowhere to sit. It's like, we can only use the office on Mondays when nobody's in, because as soon as everybody comes in on a Tuesday, the office is overrun.
Yeah. And have you seen any successful ways of influencing that attendance pattern in terms of whether it's events or something going on or some way of influencing how it pans out?
I don't know if we've been able to be honest, like, as much as, we've built out new offices, and I mean, they're great spaces, and we'll see kind of a consistent uptick in attendance in those new locations. Maybe not as much as you would think, because people, I think, are still. I mean, it's kind of like you survey it, and any survey you send out about the biggest obstacle to coming into an office, the number one answer is always commute.
Yeah,
you can't solve for that unless
price to pay in effort and time and often money.
Yeah. So what the goal is like, well, let's just create an office so that when they do come in, they're productive. They like being in there. They find, like, can you start to drive? And we do see some offices where it's like in one particular office, our attendance is like massively gone up. The number of events they're holding in the space. And that's kind of where, especially when we're talking about like sales offices and stuff, where it's like, we're now designing these offices as a revenue driving space, where it's like the use case for this office isn't for your team to come in and work from their desks. The use of this office is get clients in, get customers in, hold events, hold on site, like drive revenue in this space. And that's what we're designing the office for. And for some of these new offices that we've done now, like the number of events is astronomical, and the use and the utilization. In fact, it's almost a problem where I am having to like consider changing my demand model in certain locations, because the number of guests in the space is so high because they're hosting events so often and clients. But a lot of these are after hours because they're doing dinners and special like galas and things like that. And then now you're looking at the space and you're like, okay, well, they're hosting a gala at 7 p.m. It's like, that doesn't impact the actual office utilization. Like, that's not what we're using the office. So how do I have to start changing my demand model so that I'm not being impacted by those use cases? So those are like kind of all the, like, it's still a changing, adapting model. We're still learning, still trying to figure out the best way to do this and how we need to tweak the formulas. I mean, it'll be a constant learning thing because the behaviors are constantly changing.
Yeah. I like that idea, though, of focusing on the purpose of the team, which in that case is generating revenue, rather than fixating on who's in when. I mean, obviously to some extent, as space planning, you have to do that, but it's nice to think that, there's this real focus on the end game and not just being there. That's how it should be, isn't it? We often talk about it's not about the time and the place as much as the outcome. So it's nice to look at it that way and think about how that outcome influences the way that you make these decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's especially now that we have taken this, like I mentioned, like this bespoke approach where it's like every office is kind of being designed and programmed specific to how they use the office.
Yeah.
So it's like you do have to have a pretty deep understanding of each location, like who the leaders are, who the teams are, what are their goals in this space.
Yeah.
And then how can we build an office that supports it? Because at the end of the day, I mean, real estate is just there to support the business. It's not there to drive, lead the business in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I could talk to you all day, but I'll probably do that with a question so that you can get back to your day job. But I love the thread of your path there from the anthropology thing and through to making these models and going through this explosive growth and creating new ways of looking at demand. I think that's quite inspiring for people. And it's interesting that I guess the basic trajectory of human history, if we zoom back to hunter-gathering times, is that, there's this pattern where technologies emerge that enable more interaction between people, and then there's these social structures that evolve to realize that potential and create I guess more and more interaction and more win-win scenarios. So over the course of time, we end up embedded in these larger and ever more complex webs of interdependence as people. And some smart folks believe that we're kind of approaching a bit of a culmination of sorts. Like we've become one global brain is a good way to think about it, which is going to test our ability to accept change in structures of governance and maybe test our imagination a little bit morally, politically. And I think a lot of us keeping an eye on the whole AI thing can feel that, that the tech could get away with us before our structures and our guardrails catch up. But even taking this idea of the non-zero sumness, trying to create this way that human cultural evolution is just more and more complexity based on more and more win-win games that we can play. You can see that in the workplace. You could, in the past, way before, I guess, even the Industrial Revolution, but extending all the way through to today, there's kind of this perception at times that we're in a win-lose kind of zero-sum thing, where whether that's bosses and workers, whether that's people and portfolio, but it doesn't really need to be people versus portfolio or any of that, does it? Now that we have the technology, not just the hardware, software, but the methods and the processes, the models to deliver a bit more of a win-win, it's better. We can do things that are better for people and portfolio commercially. So reducing costs, it just doesn't need to be bad for people. Normally, when we think about reducing costs, we think it's going to be a bad thing, don't we? And improving the experience doesn't mean blowing a load of budget with no return. It feels like we can get more win-wins going on.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think, I was kind of touched on this a little bit when I talked about like the whole idea of, if we're going to, design spaces to how people want to work. It's like, how do we, let's support, if you build a space that people want to be in, and when they're in there, because we know they're not always going to be in there, it's like, well, then you've won them. And if at the same time, by doing that, and kind of with this new model of like, okay, yeah, maybe we're building this slightly larger, maybe there's a little more cost there, maybe there's some more fun amenities or things in this space, so that people went in their space, they're more productive, they enjoy being there, they're happy to be there. Yeah, what's that benefit to the business? Well, it's a pretty big benefit to the business. Helps with retention, helps people better identify with the company. And if by doing it, with this demand kind of concept where it's like, yeah, you still are able to lower your portfolio, your square footage. So there is a cost savings there too. But it can't just be about the cost savings. It's like, yes, we're able to do this and have this added benefit, but that can't be the main driver, because if that is the main driver, it becomes very clear what the priority is.
Yeah.
And I think at the end,
it's a short-term view, that, isn't it?
It is a short-term view. And it's also counterproductive, because I don't think any company wants employees who don't want to be there. It's like forcing them into the office 5 days a week into a space that they don't want to be in. It's like, do you really think you're going to get a more productive workforce that way?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so
that's research, which suggests otherwise.
Exactly. And it's like, and how long are they going to stay at your company?
Yeah.
And so that's where it's kind of it's like there can be a win-win here. We can make these spaces better and more and support the work better, more interesting, more creative, and at the same time streamline the cost and have a benefit for the company on multiple ends, not just the bottom line, but also on the culture of the company. And so it is. I think like there's a win-win there, and people just got to be willing to like aim for that.
Yeah. I think that's a great note to finish up on. Brian Hubert, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I had a great time.